Easy on the young ones, my man.
Bryce Young is an NFL bust. For now. While it may seem unfair to some to label him as a bust even though he hasn't completed a second season, it says a lot when you get benched after 18 career starts. We're not even a quarter into his second season, and the Panthers have already seemingly given up on him. And this begs the question, how bad is Bryce Young actually? Because it's certainly not all of his fault, and perhaps maybe a change of scenery could lead to better career results. But first, let's get into this. When you're selected number 1 overall, the expectations are the highest out of anyone selected in the NFL draft. And when the Carolina Panthers traded all of those picks to move up to number 1, it was clear they wanted a quarterback. The choices were simple, either Alabama's Bryce Young or Ohio State's CJ Stroud. And in my video on Stroud from a season ago, we had talked about how the Carolina Panthers seemed interested in him at first when former head coach Frank Wright and former quarterbacks coach Josh McCown were joking with Stroud at one of his pro days about living in the Charlotte area. But if you were to ask the ownership group of the Carolina Panthers today, they will say, no, we were all in on Bryce Young when that wasn't the case. It's so easy to look back in hindsight now and say, oh yeah, Stroud was clearly the better pick. But somewhere along the way, the Carolina Panthers became enamored with Bryce Young. At the time, you had some draft analysts comparing Bryce Young to Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, that's a pretty lofty comparison, especially when the two franchises, the Chiefs and Panthers, couldn't be further apart when it comes to franchise structure. And really, these comparisons, I think, fueled that decision. Patrick Mahomes had plenty of help behind him when he was drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs in 2017, and even sat out most of his rookie season before becoming a full-time starter. Bryce Young didn't have any of that. After being drafted by the Carolina Panthers first overall in 2023, they threw him right to the Wolves with no sort of help. Also, there are major differences between the two in terms of physicality and arm strength. But when you watch them on film from their college days, you can see why there were some comparisons. They were magicians back in college, making play after play after play, but in the NFL, you can't really get away with some of those things, unless you have the proper development and system around you. And right from the start, Bryce Young was doomed looking back as he went to an organization that I would compare to the Cleveland Browns from back in the day.
It digs deep to this loserdom.
Really, this mess began back in 2018 when David Tepper was now the new owner of the Carolina Panthers, and really from that point on, they have been horrible ever since. First off, players like Cam Newton, Christian McCaffrey, and Luke Kuechly were all either declining, had contract issues, or retired. Then you fire the coach that once took you to a Super Bowl in Ron Rivera, and then you hire in his place Matt Rule, who couldn't get anything going either and was later fired in his third season. And in his place was Steve Wilkes, who actually was one of the best interim head coaches I had ever seen. He took a team that started the season 1-4 and had a 6-6 record with them. And although they finished the season at 7-10, they could have made the playoffs if they just had a couple of more wins. A lot of the fan base and media thought Steve Wilkes would be the perfect hire, but nope, they ended up signing Frank Wright instead. And I guess you could say the rest is history. You even had more expectations being put on the 2023 Panthers because, okay, they almost made the playoffs in 2022. We trade all these picks to get our franchise quarterback, so surely we should be at the same point or even closer to making the playoffs compared to last season, right?
Yo, shout the season.
Wrong. The 2023 Carolina Panthers were awful. Frank Wright was fired in November after going 1-10, and the Panthers finished the 2023 season with a 2-15 record. I guess one of the only positive things you could say is Bryce Young at least started every game in his rookie season, although that could have contributed to where we are at now. His confidence just kept getting shattered week after week after week. There were only a handful of games where he threw for over 200 100 yards. He was also sacked 62 times and fumbled the ball 11 times. After starting every game his rookie season, he finished with a little over 2,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, a QB rating of 73.7, and a completion percentage of 59.8. And to make things worse, the second overall pick, CJ Stroud, goes on to ball out with the Houston Texans and goes on to make the playoffs. Some were quick to call Bryce Young a bust after just one season, but many others, including myself, wanted to wait after his second season to see how he would do. And now, here we are. It's pretty clear that Bryce Young in Carolina just isn't working out. New head coach Dave Canales was brought in to help save Bryce Young. You have to remember, he had spent all those years as the quarterback's coach in Seattle with Russell Wilson, so he has experience working with much smaller quarterbacks. However, after benching Bryce Young after 2 games, it's pretty clear that really since training camp, you can tell that they haven't been 100% behind him. And if you're not 100% confident in your quarterback, that's the type of thing that can destroy a locker room over time. So really, after the second game of the season, they were like, all right, we got to change something up. Andy Dalton is now named the starting quarterback, and I think Bryce Young's time in Carolina has come to an end. If you watch the film in those 2 games, it looks like he's seeing ghosts. I know the Carolina Panthers aren't the best team in the world, but on film, he looked just completely uncomfortable at times in a clean pocket. He was either underthrowing or overthrowing receivers, and when things did go wrong, he just couldn't make that magic to get out of it like he did at Alabama. And after 2 games into the 2024 season, he throws for less than 300 yards, has 0 touchdowns along with 3 interceptions, and a completion percentage of 55.4. So while Bryce Young is certainly a bust in Carolina, his career as a whole is not over just yet. Just take a look at 2 other quarterbacks who had to suffer in Carolina for a bit, in both Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. Darnold is now balling out with the Vikings, while Mayfield just signed an extension with the Buccaneers. Both of these quarterbacks tried and failed in Carolina, although it wasn't as bad as Bryce Young's performance, but still, there's a track record of quarterbacks leaving the Carolina Panthers and going to other franchises and finding immediate success. You also have to take into account that Bryce is way younger than those 2 quarterbacks. I still think that there is a lot of potential when it comes to Bryce Young's career. He just needs to get the hell out of Carolina to have any sort of shot now. We're gonna look back at this situation 5 years from now and think, man, Bryce Young was really almost screwed up by the Carolina Panthers, or maybe Bryce Young just isn't that good. But in my opinion, I still think he's capable of being a franchise quarterback. He just needs to be on a competent team. Only time will tell if Bryce Young is able to resurrect his NFL career. But I could see either one of 2 things happening. The first being Bryce Young moves out of Carolina, goes to a competent team, let's say like the Miami Dolphins for example, and just completely balls out. Or perhaps Bryce Young doesn't improve and just goes on to have a career as a solid backup, which isn't bad by any means, but when you are selected as the #1 overall pick, if you end up having a career as a backup quarterback, you will be remembered as one of the biggest busts in NFL history.